Alright guys, I just want to say thank you again for being here and helping me with this meeting. As I mentioned earlier, the focus of this meeting and our purpose is to take a look at traditional PED, professional development practices, versus professional learning practices, and really contrasting the two. And so the hypothesis, so to speak, that I'm making is that the teacher action research procedure that we followed in our October PD was perhaps a different way of seeing professional learning, where it allowed us to identify a science and engineering practice and then implement that science and engineering practice over time, and then reflecting upon it and seeing if students increased in their skills by repeating that science and engineering practice throughout the school year. So we're kind of contrasting the traditional PD form where you kind of sit and get information versus being allowed that choice to figure out which science and engineering practice was best for you, implement it, and reflect upon it as a tool for professional learning. So that's our focus today. So I'd just like us to kind of round robin share out kind of how that process went. So my first question is, what science and engineering practice did you focus on in your teacher action research this year? And did you see progress in your students over time by using that tool?
So I did science and engineering practice 8. And so basically evaluating and obtaining and evaluating information, I think, is that the right one? Yeah. And so I was focusing on having them do claim evidence reasoning in written form and in oral form, so speaking. So the action research, I liked that for professional learning. The only problem I found is that we didn't really meet that often. So we met in October and then again just now here in March. And so I feel like I was left hanging in the middle. And luckily, we did have the traditional PD of the S2SI to facilitate some of the strategies that I needed to know to incorporate into my action research. So I feel like they go hand in hand. I feel like if I didn't have the normal traditional PD, I would be missing a lot of the information that I would need, because what would happen is I would be obligated to acquire that information on my own, and I may not necessarily know where to look, be up to date with what the current technologies are, and or the current research is. And so for me, in going to a one-day PD and having them do all that background work and just presenting to me what I need to know for the student-to-student interactions, for claim evidence reasoning, that's the quickest, most effective form for me. Even though I am out of the classroom for a day, I think it would take me personally longer to get all that information I would need to carry out my action research more effectively. So I feel like they go hand in hand. I did like the action research.
Did you feel like your kids progressed over time in the skill of
They
claim evidence reasoning?
definitely progressed over time. I don't have any hard evidence to show that. I have lots of evidence, but doing action research for the first time, I was just trying to kind of understand, first of all, how I was going to collect evidence and how it was going to be consistent evidence, and how it's not really data that kind of changes per event, because it all looks a little bit different each time.
Right.
So I feel like I might be better at it next time. But then again, I feel like I needed maybe 2 days in between the October and March to actually work on my action research, because I get all the data and everything from my classes, but then I don't really have time in my daily routine to actually sit down and thoughtfully process it. So I had thoughtfully processed some of it, but I really wasn't able to kind of look at the data, see the trends, and make a true conclusion. So I feel like we would need, if we truly were going to do it that way, we would also need more time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel as though, I hope I've been doing action research for the last 28 years, in that I'll look at a topic and then I'll typically think of a model. So I would go after, I don't remember the exact number, but the idea of using models to help clarify a concept. And I'll give you two quick examples. One is what are called operons. And operons are essentially unique to bacteria. It's how they control genes. And so I've had students build models to articulate, to manipulate the genes involved, the repressors, the co-repressors, and I'm not going to get into the language of it, but that model building has really been effective, at least in the realm of my classroom. And I've used it for years. I get a lot of student feedback from it, so they enjoy it. And the model building isn't just an individual building a model, it's usually a group effort, and then they present their model. So we had two operons. We have the trip operon, which is tryptophan, and then the lactose operon. Those are two classic ones that you'll read about. And I think it just promotes a deeper understanding because they're manipulating objects. And in this case, they were using just everyday objects from in the classroom. And then the other one would be building phylogenetic trees, philo meaning tribe, and genetic or genesis, the formation of species, and using data, again, that engineering practice, and you can call it that, but I think, again, people that have been around for a while, we've been doing those kinds of data analysis, hopefully for decades, whereby they build phylogenetic trees based on physical evidence, like, for example, fur or feathers, or a gizzard, a amniote egg, and then they construct their tree through trial and error to try to develop evolutionary relationships. So model building to me is a practice that I've used for decades. I've used it this year, and students seem to, based on their comments and through their scores on exams, flourish under that model.
So going off a bit of what Marin said, I also agree with the fact that there was a lot of time in between the October meeting and the one we just had. And had I not had the S2SI to kind of guide me with at least one of the science and engineering practices, I was going to choose a completely different one, but I ended up with SEP 8 as well because it kind of coincided with the S2SI supporting answers with evidence. So that helped. I'm also a new teacher, so I'm enrolled in BITSA, where I also have another kind of action research. So that allowed me to have a little more of the scaffolding where I had to be accountable of data because I have to input that in my BITSA assignment. So I felt like all of those supports kind of helped me with teacher action research, but by no means just simply the professional learning that we got from it would have been significant enough. So that's kind of where I'm at, just with how it went.
Perfect, thank you.
I did the science and engineering practice of planning and carrying out investigations. I found my teacher action research to be useful, although, like Salt said, it's kind of something that we naturally do already. When we plan, we think about if it worked well or not. So, I mean, the action research itself, it seems like most of the time it kind of reaffirms what you already know. So formalizing it would be great if it's a question that I really have no idea about. I feel like getting more concrete data, then I could actually answer a real question. But the kinds of things that we were thinking of, like, I know if I have students trying to write their own procedures and trying to plan their own investigations, they're going to get more out of it.
Yeah.
It's not something that seems like a crazy idea. So on the question of PD versus PL, I think that I find that more useful than the PD. Being fresh out of the program and knowing all these terms and things that have already been talked about, most of the times when we go in PD, I already know what we're talking about. And I agree with you guys that if it's something new, it's nice to get all the information for it. Being forced to do it is one thing. Having it available, if I knew like, hey, I wanna work with claim evidence reasoning, but I don't know, I want some supports on scaffolding, how, for them to talk and work with each other. And we have that class that we could take, that PE we could take, then I'd then go and take it if I felt I needed the extra support. So, I think that
Yeah.
answers the question.
Yeah, it does, and I just, and I wanna just kind of continue our conversation on the PD versus the PL, and the PD being, you know, a one day or even a set of days, but it's really a thing you participate in, you sit, you get information, and then you leave, where the professional learning is really supposed to be about identifying what skills your students are in need of at that time, and then building professional knowledge on that skill, and then setting up a system for you to practice that with your kids and see progress and reflecting upon it. It's really inquiry based, but it's also very individual. And so I'll just kind of combine my last two questions. And some of you guys have already hit on it a little bit, but does the action research model allow for you to do that inquiry-based learning based upon what the needs of your students or the needs of yourself? Or is there another form of professional learning that you prefer? Did you like the model of teacher action research? Why or why not? And if not, then what kind of professional learning, like you were talking about, works best for you? I'll just go around for that.
Can somebody else start off to figure it out?
Yeah, I'll start real quick. I'm kind of a skeptic by nature, and I think maybe almost to a point where it bothers people, but it's who I am, and I feel as though, kind of along the lines of Ryan, that I would rather be able to tackle curriculum concept from my own viewpoint and then create the scaffolding, the curriculum, the interactions that I feel as though I have those tools in my toolbox already. Let me create it and then push into my classroom for the professional learning or development. Be the coach that watches from the sidelines, and then after the class, during my prep, after school, meet with me and then direct give me direct coaching then. I feel like in our modern world that we have so many to-do lists that professional developments are just another thing we have to do that takes away from the sanctity of the classroom. And then the final point I would say is, I feel it this week on our own campus, that to train all these teachers, in many cases, you don't have enough subs. And so then if someone's absent, then now you have to give up your prep that you would have just lost your prep the day before, for example, in the PD, and then they're calling you saying, well, the other teachers are in PD, can you help because we don't have a sub? And then you start to feel frustrated. And so that's why I say, do not take us out of our classroom. Push in, coach. Possible options would be Saturdays for people that might not have children, and soccer games and church. Maybe you could offer some of it then. Maybe you could offer it in an after-school format. But give us options so that we don't feel so shackled and we feel like we're sacrificing so much to take a professional development during the time that our students are actually in class. I want to be with my students. Don't pull me out of class to try to coach me.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
As a new teacher, I find both of them to be useful, but I feel like here, the professional developments are a little more general, on general skills of English, language, and then the S2 side is student-student interaction. In the future, using technology, whereas they're not science-specific or subject-specific. And as a new teacher, it would be really great to, if I could have a day where I'm in a lab with, a biology professional development focused on labs, I could take those back to my classroom, and then I'd be much stronger at providing those kind of differentiations for my students. I feel like once I would have more of a firmer curriculum that's, has the English language put into it, the technology, and just the lab content knowledge, as well as content information, then I'm more open to the professional learning of like teacher action research, where I'm able to track then how our students doing from point A to point B. I feel like right now, to do teacher action research, when I'm so new and I'm still learning, it's really hard to know if I'm changing things left and right, what really am I measuring? Am I measuring students getting better, or am I just measuring myself changing how I'm practicing teaching? So I think that it's a little different coming in as a new teacher versus a veteran teacher who has a repertoire of great activities that you know how to implement and can follow that. I just don't have that,
Right.
so.
Tracy?
Yeah, I guess it's a combination of what you both said. I find the PDs to be useful if I've elected to do it. So I've done my own PDs that I've elected to do. I spent 2 weeks in Cal Poly doing one just on physics instruction when I was a new teacher, and that was great. I got a lot of useful experiments, ideas, activities that I just tried to implement. And then there's a few here in San Diego, some workshops on the weekend that I elected to do in my own time, and I found it very beneficial. So I think having those PDs in times where we're not teaching, because again, it is stressful, because it's like this week, I had Monday I had to cover a class, Tuesday I wasn't here, so I had to leave sub plans, and then when I got back on Wednesday, trying to figure out what my kids got from the sub and where I'm going, and then I'm pulled out to class cover again, so I don't have like a great lesson for them that day, is how it kind of felt like. And so I do feel like it kind of shortchanges how much the students get. And this is another side tangent, but especially when I've got an AP class and I'm really concerned about trying to get everything for them in time. And I'll take the time, obviously. I've taken time out of my weekends, my summers, to go to PDs that I found beneficial. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with having PDs be like only outside of class time. And then I like the idea of, when I first a credential program, I get evaluated a bunch of times. Someone would come in class, or a master teacher would watch me and give me feedback on it right after. And that was very beneficial. The coaching technique to that is very helpful. What was the rest of that question?
No, that was it. You got it. Yeah, but your preferred way of PL.
So I guess I kind of agree with Salt. Oh.
Did you feel a difference between having your PL being subject specific? It sounds like the ones you elected to were subject specific.
Yeah, the PDs I did were subject specific.
Just like that choice.
I like that choice.
Yeah, I do too. It's good.
And I know there's PDs about, that are merging the very things that we're trying to do in our classes.
Yeah.
There's PDs that merge S2SI with the science classroom.
Yeah.
And so it'd be great to do something like that, rather than being in a classroom with
Yeah.
PE teachers that don't do it at all, so
Same
they
thing,
don't,
yeah.
I'm not getting much out of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Thank you.
So I feel like I'm a little bit different than the three of you, but that's fine. It adds variety. But I find that what I feel is so I'm kind of in the middle. I've been teaching for 15 years, so I'm not new, but I'm not super at the end of my spectrum. And so for me, it's like I came in the credential program doing the California State Standards, which were totally different than the Common Core that we have right now. And so for me, the transition to the Common Core with the speaking and listening and the reading and writing, it's so much more English based. And so for me, I found that having the PDs to kind of transition me to have those kind of structures in place in a science classroom has been really helpful for me. And I have a little one at home and I coach rugby, so for me, I don't have time on my own to go and look into what PDs I want. I don't have time during the summer to go to PDs. On the weekends I don't. So for me, I have to have it in-house if I'm going to have it. I don't know if it's like that I need it for a full day, maybe half a day would suffice, where I can just get what I need and then I can go back to my room and play with it, tinker with it. But I mean, even down to like the ELD training way back when we learned about the ELD standards, because I mean, I just had my observation, I put ELD standards on there, and the principal was like, wow, you have ELD standards on your observation. And I said, well, yeah, because these students need to have their needs met, and the standard says that they're collaborating and they're speaking and listening, and they just tie with the Common Core. And so I feel like if I hadn't had those ELD standards, like where would I have picked that up along the way? So for me, I just think that when the county or whoever can come in and bring just like what's the latest, I need to know what's the latest, because I don't have time on my own to figure out what is the latest. And I feel like I'm really comfortable with my subject matter. And when I do research lessons, I tend to research what's the latest for my subject, but not necessarily for Common Core or ELD or whatever. So for me, I feel that they bring in the things that I'm not as interested in, but I need to know to add to my curriculum, and so they give me the necessary items. There we go.
Perfect, Shane.
Perfect.
All right, thank you guys, I just want to thank you again for
Okay.
our time, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, you know.
Okay, you guys are wonderful.
Thank you.